Hello again. I hope you're all well. We're going to continue now our conversation on the Hindu traditions. So let me share my screen with you and we will get started. Um, so there you have it right there. What we're going to talk about today is the Varna system. So we want to talk about the Varna system, which is an important part historically and up to the current moment, important part of how society is organized within the Hindu culture, within Hindu society, such as within India, for example. So let's get started looking into it. We'll talk about today the Dharma Shastras. We'll talk about the Varna system and the laws of Manu. And that will be all we have time for this lecture. And then we'll pick it up as we go forward onto the next. Okay, so the Dharma Shastras, just to mention in the title Shastra, Dharma Shastra, you see the word Dharma, and we call with me that word Dharma. It means duty, right? And it's an important concept within the Hindu tradition. So the Dharma Shastras, it's a collection of writings that focus in part on how one does their duty. All right. So the Dharma Shastras, they are varied ritual practices within the Dharma Shastras. There's dietary rules, and there's a range of other philosophical teachings. By the first century Common Era, the treatises were written on the nature of righteousness, moral duty, and law, and these treatises collectively were known as the Dharma Shastras. So by the first century Common Era. Now, amongst these Dharma Shastras, these writings that focus on the nature of righteousness, moral duty, and law, amongst these, the most famous is known as the Laws of Manu. The Laws of Manu, they reflect the social norms of their time. And therefore, often we see women slip into these inferior positions. Um, Whereas in the Vedas, which were written before, right, the oldest sacred text in the Hindu tradition, relatively speaking, women had more of an elevated position within the Vedas than you see here within the laws of Manu, within the Dharma Shastras. The laws of Manu, it should be mentioned, are not followed strictly all of the time, and some of the pronouncements on women should be taken with a grain of salt, right? In terms of just shouldn't be taken too literally or imagined to be applied frequently within Hindu culture and society. So the Dharma Shastras, they set out the rules and duties of four principal varnas. The word varna could mean like color. Um, it gets misnamed caste within the English language, but the varna, there's four major varnas that get explicated within the Dharma Shastras. The first is the priestly varna, or the Brahmins. The second is the Kshatriyas, are the Varna of the rulers and the warriors. The third is the Vaishyas, which is the merchants, those involved in a commercial business. And then the fourth Varna, the lowest Varna, is the Shudras, which is the servants. Of note, the Kshatriya class, the class of the rulers and warriors, they may study the Vedas, the oldest sacred text in the Hindu tradition, but they're not able to teach them. The laws of Manu, which we referenced, the most important collection of Dharma Shastras from the earlier period. The laws of Manu state that the seniority of Brahmins comes from sacred knowledge. So the Brahmins, that Varna focuses on, they're responsible for studying, learning, and teaching the Vedas. And so their seniority comes from sacred knowledge, such as knowing the Vedas. That of the Kshatriyas from valor, from bravery, right, which is something we associate with warriors, for example. The Vaishyas from wealth, and we associate people who do business, right, and work in commerce and are merchants with wealth. And then the Shudras, it's only from old age, and so there's not much, space there for the Shudras outside of being servants within this system. So this is just a word here. I wanted to pause. Here's a word on just the history of interpreting the Varna system. So first to mention the word Varna, it translates as color or order or type or class. And there are more than 1,000 jatis, or birth groups, in India. Now, from the outsider view, the person who's not a part of the Hindu tradition and culture within India, from the outsider view, is where you have that term caste that emerges. It's the British and Portuguese who, when you're looking at this like social system, they appropriate the word caste, which is a Portuguese word, which means race, in order to describe what they see. And so British colonialism, which relied on a misrepresentation of indigenous groups, shapes how the caste system is often interpreted and evaluated. In practice, the system is more complex. That is, the Varna system is more complex and flexible than the Dharma Shastras suggest. So that should be kept in mind as well. Okay, so I want to just unpack a little bit more, kind of review a little bit more of the Varna system with you in the remainder of this lecture. So the Varna system, you can see here on the right, we have that image, which kind of just reminds us of the different divisions and the hierarchy within the Varna system. And again, to reiterate, Varna is a shorthand for thousands of social and occupational divisions, and people are routinely identified by their jati, by their birth group. The Varna system, and we talked about this hymn when we were introduced to the Vedas. We briefly talked about this hymn to the Supreme Person. I recited a little bit of it during our discussion of the Vedas. And that hymn to the Supreme Person, which is Purusha's body, recall it gets divided into different parts, and those different parts get assigned to different varnas, right? Different classes. And so the mouth of Purusha is analogous to the priest, the Brahmin. The arms are analogous to the Kshatriya, right? The rulers. The legs get associated with the Vaishya, the producers, the farmers, the merchants. And then the feet, the lowest part, as you would probably suspect, gets associated with the Sudra, with the servants, the laborers. I do want to mention, if you look at the pyramid on the slide here, there's a group that is disconnected from those four Varnas, and sometimes they do get brought up. So just to mention, there's the untouchables, and these are people who work in different areas that have pollutants or things that might be harmful to the body, or people who might have disease, such as leprosy. They might be deemed untouchable, which stands outside of this Varna system. Pardon me. Pardon me. So just kind of reviewing with you as we wrap up this lecture on the Varna system, these are just examples with images. Here is a Brahmin, right? An ascetic or holy man applying white ash on the body of on the face of a blessed devotee. This is the act of bhakti, right? Doing devotion is a big part of the Hindu way of life. So again, to reiterate, it's only Brahmins, right? The priestly class. It's only Brahmins who exclusively have the responsibility to teach the Vedas. Now, it's important to note that not all Brahmins are priests. They have the option to work in business or work in a wide variety of different occupations other than being a priest. So not all Brahmins are priests, but all enjoy the prestige associated with spiritual learning. And it should be noted that while not all Brahmins are priests, all priests are Brahmins, right? And so that should be kept in mind. And again, this is a position that's taken seriously within the Hindu tradition. So you have schools. There's a traditional Brahmin school in the temple in Madurai, India, where they're learning how to recite. They're learning to studying the Vedas and the sacred texts and literature, but they're also learning how to recite the hymns correctly within these schools. And that's what you see here. We have young Brahmins belonging to that priestly class who are learning how to recite the hymns correctly. Because remember, a lot of the Vedas are composed in a form of song or hymn. So that's an important skill that one learns from a young age and then onwards. Again, so below the Brahmins, you have the Kshatriya, which are the warriors, the rulers, and administrators. Here's just an image, kind of highlighting that. This is the image of an Indian army parade in Calcutta on Republic Day. So the laws of Manu describe duties of the king succinctly. The king should be one who strives to conquer their senses in order to lead a life of self-control in order to control others. The king must shun vices of pleasure, such as hunting, gambling, drinking, women, vices of wrath, violence, envy, and slander. So for the king to fulfill their duty, their dharma, they need to model these virtues, right, and strive for these virtues. So this is the type of instruction you find within the laws of Manu. And so then you have underneath the Kshatriya, you have the Vaishya class, the class that does business, right? So commercial transactions and agriculture. They have access to power of wealth and economic decisions. And of note, this particular class, this Varna, the Vaishya, they are permitted to study the Vedas, but they don't teach the Vedas. So that's the third class. And then on the bottom of the three classes, the final class are Varna is the Shudras. And the duty of the Shudras is to serve the other classes. They're not permitted to accumulate wealth. So for example, these particular women may very well belong to the Shudra class, potentially. Outcast occupations that are associated with pollution, those who are deemed outcasts, such as dealing with corpses or working with animal hides, for example, would qualify as those who belong to the outcasts, or having leprosy. That also would make you not, that would make you outcast and not part of this Varna system, right? So it would be even kind of more removed than, say, the Shudras or the servant class. Okay, so again, in some ways, there is this way that the Varna system can be used to explain, to give a rationale to, say, poverty, right? In a way that might not be all that helpful and accurate in terms of why poverty truly exists, right? In the minds of most of us. But it's not just within the Hindu tradition, other traditions as well, such as in the Christian tradition, especially within the United States. The sacred texts were used to legitimize slavery prior to the Civil War of the 19th century. And so just to wrap up our reflections on the Varna system, it's a system that's been in place for thousands of years within Hindu traditions and cultures. It's a system that finds its kind of its warrant within the sacred texts within the Hindu tradition, from the Vedas onwards. And it's a system that has been pushed back against in different ways, but nonetheless, it's still a system that's in place. And from the outsider perspective, it could be viewed in different ways, or be viewed to be legitimatizing hierarchies and impressions. And in some ways, we see that across religious traditions. There's always a temptation to use sacred texts to legitimize oppression, to legitimize hierarchies. And you see this in the Christian tradition. Just to wrap it up, to give another example, right? The use of the sacred text to legitimize slavery. All right, so I'm going to leave it there, and we'll pick it up next class. And thank you so much. Take care.